Picture this. A movie set in 1974, packed with fart jokes, racist villains getting outsmarted, and a fistfight that literally crashes through the walls of the movie studio itself. That's Blazing Saddles. And for 50 years, people thought they had seen every wild, jaw-dropping moment this film had to offer. But hiding in plain sight, in one of the most famous scenes in the whole movie, there's a mistake that almost nobody caught. Not film critics, not movie historians, not even die-hard fans who have watched this movie 100 times. It took decades before someone finally spotted it, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So what is this blooper? Why did it slip past everyone for so long? And what does it tell us about how this insane, rule-breaking comedy actually got made? Stick around, because the story behind this mistake is just as wild as the movie itself. To understand how something like this could slide past everyone, you first have to understand just how chaotic the making of Blazing Saddles really was. This wasn't some carefully polished studio production where every frame got checked 100 times. This was a movie made by a director who basically declared war on the rules. Mel Brooks did not want to make a safe comedy. He wanted to make something that punched Hollywood right in the face, and he was willing to risk everything to do it. In 1974, America was a mess. The Vietnam War had just ended in disgrace. President Nixon was about to resign because of Watergate. People did not trust their leaders anymore, and a lot of old ideas about heroes in the American West were starting to crumble too. For decades, Hollywood had been making cowboy movies where white men were always the heroes and everybody else was just background scenery. Mel Brooks looked at that tradition and decided to tear it apart. The plot of Blazing Saddles sounds simple on paper. A corrupt land developer wants to scare the people out of a small western town so he can steal the land for a railroad deal. His plan? Convince the governor to appoint a black sheriff, figuring the townspeople will be so shocked and angry that they will pack up and leave. But the plan backfires. The new sheriff, a sharp and clever man named Bart, played by Cleveland Little, turns out to be smarter than every single person trying to take him down. What starts as a cruel joke turns into one man outsmarting an entire town of bigots, one ridiculous scheme at a time. This movie did not hold back. It used language that would never make it into a mainstream comedy today, not because the movie was racist, but because it was using racism as the target of every joke. Audiences in 1974 had never seen anything like it. They had never seen toilet humor this bold in a major studio film. They had definitely never seen a black hero make every white character in the movie look like a fool. Mel Brooks did not write this alone. One of his co-writers was Richard Pryor, one of the most fearless comedians in history. Pryor helped shape Bart into someone who was not just clever, but completely aware of how ridiculous his situation was. In fact, Pryor was originally supposed to play Bart himself. But the studio refused to insure him because of his past struggles with drugs. So the role went to Cleveland Little instead. That single decision changed the entire tone of the film, and we will come back to why that matters later. Brooks later admitted in interviews that losing Pryor as the lead was one of the hardest blows during production. He had written the role specifically with Pryor's voice in his head, his rhythm, his fearlessness, his ability to say the unsayable and somehow make it land as comedy instead of cruelty. Cleveland Little brought something different, a cooler, more theatrical energy shaped by years on Broadway, and it ended up working in its own way. But it is worth sitting with the fact that the version of Blazing Saddles we all know is not the version Brooks originally imagined. The film survived a major last-minute identity crisis before a single scene was even shot, and somehow it still became a classic. By the time the credits roll, Blazing Saddles has broken almost every rule a movie is supposed to follow. The final fight scene does not even stay inside the story. The characters smash through the set, run across the actual Warner Brothers studio lot, crash into other movies being filmed nearby, and eventually end up watching themselves on a movie theater screen. It is absurd. It is chaotic. And it is exactly the kind of madness that made this movie impossible to predict. Which brings us to the blooper. Because in the middle of all this carefully planned chaos, there is one moment that was never supposed to happen at all. The scene takes place during that explosive final chase, when the fight spills out of Rock Ridge and onto the actual studio lot. The cast is running, swinging, crashing through fake buildings, and bursting out into the real world outside the soundstage. The camera follows them onto a street just outside the studio gates, a street that, in real life, was open to the public. And that is where things get strange. As the actors run past, a man in regular street clothes walks calmly through the background of the shot. He is not in costume. He is not part of the cast. He has no idea he is in the middle of filming one of the most expensive comedies of the year. He is just a random guy who happened to be walking by at the exact wrong, or honestly the exact right, moment. For decades, almost nobody noticed him. He blends in so well with the chaos around him that your eye naturally slides right past him. But once someone points him out, you cannot stop seeing it. There he is, totally unbothered, strolling through a scene packed with actors in full Western costumes, fake fights, and absolute pandemonium. So why did this make it into the final movie? Because Mel Brooks loved it. When the crew realized what had happened, the obvious move would have been to scrap the take and shoot it again. Instead, Brooks looked at the footage and said something close to leave him in, "It is funny." And he was right. That confused stranger walking through frame adds an extra layer of randomness to a scene that was already supposed to feel out of control. It became an accidental piece of film history, frozen forever in one of the most famous comedies ever made, and almost nobody clocked it until people started rewatching the film frame by frame decades later. What makes this even stranger is that nobody actually knows who this man was. There has never been a confirmed name attached to him, no interview, no late-in-life confession of being the accidental extra in one of the most beloved comedies ever made. Film historians have speculated over the years that he may have worked at a neighboring studio lot and simply cut through the street as a shortcut, completely unaware that cameras were rolling just a few feet away. Others believe he might have been a tourist, since the area around the Warner lot was known to attract people hoping to catch a glimpse of a film shoot. Either way, he never came forward, and the mystery only adds to the legend. Somewhere out there, a man may have gone his entire life without ever realizing he had a permanent, uncredited role in a movie now studied in film schools. It is also worth thinking about how differently this would play out today. In modern filmmaking, a mistake like this would likely get caught within minutes. Digital playback lets directors review footage instantly, and visual effects teams can erase an unwanted person from a shot with a few clicks. But Blazing Saddles was shot on film, which meant nobody could watch the take back right away. The crew had to wait for the footage to be developed before they even saw what had happened. By the time anyone noticed the stranger walking through the background, it was already too late to reshoot the scene exactly the same way, and honestly, nobody seemed to mind. That single technical limitation, the simple fact that film could not be checked instantly, is part of the reason this kind of accident was even possible in the first place. It is a small reminder of just how different filmmaking was 50 years ago, when chaos was not just allowed, it was sometimes unavoidable. This was not a one-time accident either. It was part of a much bigger pattern. Mel Brooks built his entire directing style around chaos, improvisation, and happy accidents. He wanted his actors to break from the script if something funnier happened in the moment. Gene Wilder, who played the washed-up gunslinger known as the Waco Kid, changed his lines on set constantly, letting his strange, laid-back delivery shape the character in ways that were never written down. Cleveland Little's dry stares and perfectly timed silences, as Bart, were not all scripted either. A lot of that came from him simply reacting in the moment, and Brooks let it stay because it worked. The most famous example of this philosophy in action is the campfire scene, the one where a group of cowboys sit around eating beans and, well, you know what happens next. No major studio film had ever included a flatulence joke with full sound before. When Brooks tested the scene with an audience, people laughed so hard they could not even hear the rest of the dialogue. So instead of toning it down, Brooks went back into post-production and added even more sound effects. The studio executives were horrified. They called it vulgar and pointless. Brooks ignored them completely, and that scene became one of the most quoted moments in comedy history. There was another moment built almost entirely on chaos that became just as legendary, the scene where young Bart and his family are surrounded by Native American warriors on horseback. It looks like it is about to turn violent, until the tribal chief, played by Mel Brooks himself, opens his mouth and starts speaking fluent Yiddish. The other warriors nod along like this is completely normal. One of them even shouts a word that basically means it is the Sabbath. It makes absolutely no logical sense, and that is exactly the point. Brooks was mocking how Hollywood had spent decades treating Native Americans as faceless, voiceless background characters in westerns. By giving them an unexpected, ridiculous voice, he was exposing how lazy and disrespectful those old portrayals really were. Even the movie's opening song plays into this same idea of controlled chaos hiding underneath a straight face. The title song was performed by Frankie Laine, a legendary Western singer known for serious, emotional vocal performances. Brooks specifically did not tell him the movie was a comedy. Laine sang every line like he was recording the theme for a serious, dramatic epic, completely unaware that the lyrics underneath his powerful voice were ridiculous and exaggerated. The result is pure comic irony, a song so sincere it becomes hilarious simply because the man singing it never got the joke. All of this tells you something important about how this movie was made. It was not polished. It was not carefully controlled from start to finish. It was a film built on improvisation, risk, and a director who was willing to let chaos run the show. So when a random stranger wanders through one of the most important scenes in the movie, it almost makes sense that nobody stopped to fix it. In a film already overflowing with unpredictable, off-script chaos, one extra unplanned moment simply melted into the background. But getting this movie made in the first place was its own battle, and it almost did not happen at all. When Warner Brothers executives sat down to watch the final cut for the first time, the room went dead silent. Nobody laughed. Nobody clapped. One executive reportedly said the film was too vulgar for American audiences. Another called it career-ending. Mel Brooks sat in that same screening room completely convinced they were all wrong. Here is the thing that saved the movie. Brooks had final cut approval written into his contract, meaning the studio legally could not change or censor anything without his permission. For most directors, this kind of power is a dream. For Warner Brothers, it became a serious problem, because the studio wanted to quietly bury the film. According to industry insiders, the original plan was to release it in just a few cities, let it fade away without much promotion, and avoid taking the blame if it flopped or caused outrage. That plan completely fell apart the moment audiences actually saw it. When Blazing Saddles opened in limited release in February 1974, theaters in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago were packed. Some theaters extended their showings because demand would not stop. Warner Brothers, realizing they had completely misjudged what they were sitting on, scrambled to expand the release nationwide. The film that executives wanted to quietly hide ended up earning over $100 million and became one of the biggest comedy hits of the entire decade. None of that success was guaranteed, though, especially once you look at how rocky the casting process really was. We already mentioned that Richard Pryor was supposed to play Bart, but got passed over because the studio would not insure him. That same kind of last-minute panic hit the casting of the Waco Kid too. The role originally went to Gig Young, a respected, Oscar-winning actor. On his very first day of filming, during the scene where his character wakes up hanging upside down in a jail cell, Young collapsed on set. He was struggling with severe alcohol withdrawal, and production had to stop completely. Brooks fired him immediately and needed a replacement fast. That is when he called Gene Wilder, who he had already worked with on The Producers. Wilder said yes almost instantly, flew out, and started filming the very next day. His performance as the Waco Kid, this strange mix of spaced-out wisdom and dry sarcasm, became one of the most beloved parts of the entire film. Nobody planned for him to play that role. He was a last-minute emergency fix that turned into one of the best casting decisions in the whole movie. Even some of the biggest names in Hollywood wanted nothing to do with this project. John Wayne was offered a small cameo and turned it down flat, saying it was too inappropriate for his image. He reportedly told Brooks something along the lines of, "I cannot be in it, but I will be first in line to see it." That tells you everything about how risky this movie looked to people inside the industry before it actually came out. Looking back now, it is almost funny how wrong the executives were. The film that they thought would end careers ended up boosting them instead. Cleavon Little, despite never quite reaching the same level of fame again, became a beloved figure tied forever to one of the most quoted comedies in history. Gene Wilder went on to star in Young Frankenstein the very same year, cementing his partnership with Brooks as one of the great director-actor pairings in comedy. Even Mel Brooks himself has said in later interviews that the success of Blazing Saddles gave him the freedom and the leverage to keep making fearless, boundary-pushing films for the rest of his career. In a strange way, the movie the studio tried to bury ended up being the thing that built an entire legacy. So when you put it all together, the random stranger casually strolling through that final chase scene is not just some random mistake. It is a perfect symbol of everything Blazing Saddles actually was. A movie built on chaos that the studio tried to bury, made by actors who were encouraged to improvise and break the rules, led by a director who was willing to fight his own studio just to keep his vision intact. In a film this unpredictable, of course one stranger could wander straight through a scene and nobody would even notice for decades. That is the real story behind the huge blooper hiding in Blazing Saddles. A movie packed with so much chaos, so much risk, and so much improvisation that one of its biggest mistakes did not even get caught until people started rewatching it frame by frame, 50 years later.